Picture yourself stepping into the glittering realm of classic Hollywood, the era of grand movie palaces, glamorous starlets floating down red carpets in sparkling gowns, and directors seeking fresh faces to dazzle audiences worldwide. In that mesmerizing time, there emerged one particularly refined and radiant performer whose on-screen presence exuded both elegance and a hint of mystery. This was Joan Fontaine, an actress so talented and multifaceted that she seemed to inhabit every role with ease, whether she was portraying a timid ingenue caught in the sinister web of a suspense thriller or a worldly, confident woman navigating social intrigue. Over the course of her long life, Fontaine dived into far more than just movie sets, forging adventures in everything from balloon racing to gourmet cooking. Today, let us unravel Joan Fontaine's extraordinary story, from her early days in Tokyo to her final tranquil years in Carmel, weaving in all the glitter and drama that made her a timeless icon. Joan de Beauvoir de Havilland was born on October 22, 1917, in Tokyo, Japan, where her British parents were living at the time. Though few suspected she would grow up to be a star in the film industry, there was already a hint of destiny in her bloodline. Her older sister was none other than Olivia de Havilland, who would become a legendary actress in her own right. From the outside, one might imagine that two talented sisters with a passion for performance would share a bond of unwavering support. But the reality was quite different. Joan and Olivia's relationship became a complex tapestry of rivalry and misunderstanding, which only added to the fascination that audiences felt toward the de Havilland sisters. For Joan, however, this story began in a far simpler setting, Tokyo, where she spent her earliest months surrounded by the bustle of a foreign land, quickly learning to adapt to an environment that melded British customs with Japanese culture. Joan's parents, her father, Walter de Havilland, was a British patent attorney practicing in Japan, and her mother, Lillian, had once been an actress, lived abroad with a certain air of worldly sophistication. Yet beneath that seemingly polished exterior lay a number of tensions. Joan was still just a baby when the family relocated to Saratoga, California, following a doctor's advice meant to help her fragile health. From the start, Joan battled illnesses, so her mother believed the Californian climate would be gentler on her. Soon after this move, her father returned alone to Japan to continue his law practice. The distance proved too great for the marriage. Her parents divorced when Joan was only 2, setting into motion a family dynamic that would be complicated at best. Her mother, Lillian, remarried a store manager named George Fontaine, a strict man who never quite won over either Joan or Olivia. Eventually, both sisters would adopt elements of his surname. Joan, in particular, would famously become Joan Fontaine, a name that led to both stardom and confusion regarding her familial ties. Growing up in California, Joan discovered that the sunshine and warm breezes her mother had hoped would protect her health brought new challenges to her personal life. Her mother was devoted to the idea that Joan and Olivia would both become accomplished young ladies, but that created competition between them from an early age. By Joan's own recollection, Olivia never welcomed the idea of a younger sister vying for the mother's affection. They squabbled in ways that went beyond ordinary sibling rivalry, each forging her own path while keeping a wary eye on the other's successes and stumbles. These tensions simmered beneath the surface and would later become the stuff of Hollywood gossip columns, swirling around the question, were these two talented sisters truly at odds, or was it just media exaggeration? For Joan, life was not all about quarreling at home. She was exceedingly bright, with an IQ of 160, and thrived academically at Los Gatos High School in Saratoga. This intellectual spark set her apart from many aspiring actresses of the time, giving her a depth of curiosity that she would carry for the rest of her life. After finishing high school, Joan briefly returned to Japan to live with her father, immersing herself in that cultural tapestry she had known only faintly during the infancy. She attended the American school there for a year, soaking up both language skills and global perspective. The adventure might have continued longer, but something else beckoned. The lure of the stage, the bright lights of theatrical productions, and the prospect of following in her sister Olivia's footsteps, who had already begun to dabble in theater. Family friction aside, it was intriguing to Joan that Olivia was forging a path in acting. Perhaps the creative spark was contagious. As she stepped into the acting world, Joan needed a professional name distinct from Olivia de Havilland. At first she tried Joan Burfield, borrowing Burfield from a Hollywood street name. That, however, didn't entirely stick. She even toyed with Joan St. John for a brief period, striving to find something that sounded suitably glamorous and memorable. It was ironically on the advice of a fortune teller that she settled upon Joan Fontaine, adopting her stepfather's surname. Little did she know this choice would become far more than a mere stage name. It would cement her identity in Hollywood, eventually eclipsing any confusion about her family ties. In 1935, she made her stage debut opposite the renowned May Robson in a production of Kind Lady. The same year, she landed a small role in the film No More Ladies, a stepping stone that introduced her to the world of cinema. She was still raw and unproven in the eyes of casting directors, but her grace and promise were evident. RKO, one of the major studios of that era, recognized her potential and signed her to a contract in 1937. It was a significant milestone. If you were an aspiring actress in Hollywood, securing a contract with a studio meant financial stability, promotional backing, and a series of film roles that could either make or break your career. For Joan, RKO offered the possibility of stardom. However, the trajectory would not be straightforward. One of her earliest prominent roles for RKO was 1937's A Damsel in Distress, in which she starred opposite the dancing legend Fred Astaire. Astaire was best known for his partnership with Ginger Rogers, so this marked his first RKO musical without Rogers. Despite Fred Astaire's fame, the film didn't set the box office on fire. Joan's performance was pleasant enough, but it failed to launch her as a major name. She continued to appear in various productions, including a part in the all-star 1939 film The Women, which boasted the formidable presence of Norma Shearer and Joan Crawford. While The Women sparkled for the audience, Joan Fontaine's own star power still seemed to be in a holding pattern. When her contract with RKO expired in 1939, the studio did not renew it. In that moment, it might have felt like her chance at greatness was slipping away. But destiny had other plans. In 1940, the British master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock, was embarking on his first Hollywood film, Rebecca, produced by David O. Selznick. The role of the unnamed second Mrs. De Winter was crucial. It required an actress who could embody vulnerability, quiet strength, and a sense of gradually mounting suspense. The competition for this part was fierce, spanning months of screen tests. Joan Fontaine, still somewhat overlooked by the industry, landed the part. This might be described as the break of her lifetime. Critics and audiences alike fell under the spell of her performance. Rebecca was a triumph, showcasing her ability to convey both fragility and determination under Hitchcock's exacting direction. She received her first Academy Award nomination for Best Actress, but lost that year to Ginger Rogers for Kitty Foyle. Nonetheless, being nominated was enough to shift Hollywood's gaze. Who was this refined, introspective actress who had emerged from near obscurity? Then came the moment that solidified her forever in the annals of cinema. In 1941, Hitchcock directed her again, this time in Suspicion, opposite Cary Grant. Fontaine's portrayal of a woman plagued by doubts and increasing paranoia about her husband's intentions was hauntingly effective. She won the Oscar for Best Actress, making her the only actor ever to earn an Academy Award under Hitchcock's direction. In an industry that thrived on behind-the-scenes intrigue, this accolade was doubly sweet. It placed her alongside top-tier actresses of the day and, to some extent, overshadowed the achievements of her sister Olivia, who had already garnered attention for her role in Gone with the Wind. The tension between the sisters, long a private matter, now became a public topic. Gossip columnists loved painting them as bitter rivals, and while the truth was undoubtedly more nuanced, there was no denying the friction that came from their parallel rises to fame. Buoyed by her Oscar win, Joan soared into the 1940s and early 1950s as a headline star. She alternated between romantic melodramas and suspenseful ventures, excelling at both. Movies like This Above All, 1942, The Constant Nymph, 1943, which earned her a third Oscar nomination, Jane Eyre, 1944, and Letter from an Unknown Woman, 1948, capitalized on her ability to portray deeply emotional heroines, often navigating storms of passion or moral dilemmas. She displayed a kind of luminous fragility, an intangible quality that made audiences root for her even when her characters found themselves in devastating circumstances. Alongside these heavier roles, she ventured into more light-hearted territory too, sharing the screen with Bing Crosby in The Emperor Waltz, 1948. Each project expanded her reputation, carving out a niche as a graceful leading lady who could handle layered, complex scripts. But no Hollywood career runs smoothly forever. By the early 1950s, the film industry was changing. Television was on the rise, major studios faced economic challenges, and the once mighty star system began to shift. Joan Fontaine, now in her mid-30s, sensed that her days of playing the naive young ingenue were winding down. Projects like Darling, How Could You, also known as Rendezvous, 1951, proved disappointing, both financially and artistically. But Joan was nothing if not adaptable. Rather than cling to her earlier persona, she pivoted toward more mature roles, and sometimes even characters who displayed a harder edge or calculating nature. Films like The Bigamist, 1953, Casanova's Big Night, 1954, and Island in the Sun, 1957, saw her expanding her range, embodying women who were savvy and not always sympathetic. Such changes were in step with a broader evolution in cinema as audiences began craving more realism and complexity in their stories. Meanwhile, away from the bright lights, Joan Fontaine embraced a lifestyle that underscored her sense of adventure. She was never the stereotypical star who simply lounged in a Beverly Hills mansion waiting for the next script. She had wide-ranging pursuits, some might even say eccentric for the era. She became an avid balloon racer, once winning a balloon race in Holland. She took up fox hunting and tuna fishing. She developed considerable skill on the golf course, indulging in the sport whenever time allowed. She earned a pilot's license, showing that she wasn't content to remain earthbound. Just as surprising to some, she possessed an impressive culinary talent, reportedly mastering haute cuisine as a cordon bleu cook. Her circle of acquaintances expanded beyond film producers and co-stars to include European aristocracy and the cosmopolitan set, reflecting her thirst for new experiences. For a star of that period, traveling the globe to chase hobbies was still somewhat unconventional, but it gave her a fuller life beyond the box office. Though her focus increasingly veered toward these personal interests, Joan did not desert show business altogether. As film opportunities dwindled, she ventured onto the stage, starring in multiple theatrical productions, including a lauded performance in Tea and Sympathy on Broadway in 1954. She also tackled Noel Coward's Private Lives and Alfred Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder in stage adaptations, surprising audiences with her ability to command a live performance as skillfully as she could control a cinematic close-up. Periodically, she made forays into television as well, from guest appearances in shows like Wagon Train and The Bing Crosby Show to more substantial roles. She demonstrated a willingness to adapt. She stayed relevant long enough that by the 1970s, she found an additional niche on the lecture circuit, sharing her experiences and insights with students and women's groups, occasionally drawing from the romantic legacy of the poets Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. Even with these varied pursuits, the public never ceased to be fascinated by the de Havilland-Fontaine feud. Tales circulated about them refusing to speak or refusing to appear at the same events. Some claimed they hadn't spoken since the mid-1970s. Both sisters would from time to time deny the extremes of the rumors, but the press latched onto any mention of tension. They were pitted against each other in 1942 when both were nominated for the Best Actress Oscar, Joan for Suspicion and Olivia for Hold Back the Dawn. Joan famously won that year, stirring more speculation about how Olivia felt. Over time, each woman developed her own legendary status, with fans speculating in perpetuity about whether they would ever reconcile. Amid the swirl of career moves and personal escapades, Joan married 4 times, brief unions that each seemed to highlight a different aspect of her evolving identity. She first wed the British actor Brian Aherne in 1939, though they divorced in 1945. A year later, she married actor-producer William Dozier, with whom she had a daughter, Debbie. That marriage ended in 1951, paving the way for her third union, to producer and writer Collier Young, which lasted from 1952 to 1961. In 1964, she married journalist Alfred Wright Jr., only to divorce him in 1969. Romance seemed to bring a measure of excitement and heartbreak into Joan's life, but her desire for adventure never dimmed. In 1952, she adopted a young Peruvian girl named Martita. The relationship, unfortunately, devolved into estrangement when Martita ran away from home, echoing some of the conflicts that also emerged with Joan's biological daughter, Debbie. Despite these disappointments, Joan pressed on, finding solace in the financial success she achieved through real estate, oil investments, and even cattle farming. She turned out to be as canny in business as she was graceful on screen. Her presence on television remained robust in later decades. She received an Emmy nomination for her appearances in the daytime drama Ryan's Hope, and popped up in popular series like The Love Boat and Hotel, demonstrating she could still charm viewers in an era that had changed drastically since her heyday. In 1994, she made her final on-screen performance in a television film called Good King Wenceslas, portraying Queen Ludmilla. Though a far cry from her early years playing vulnerable heroines in black and white classics, the role had its own charm, reminding audiences that age had not diminished her regal bearing or her ability to create a compelling character. Eventually, the relentless pace of show business and the swirl of social engagements gave way to something calmer. Joan chose to spend her final years in Carmel, California, known for its scenic ocean views, artist enclaves, and a slower, more contemplative lifestyle. There she tended to her gardens, found companionship in her beloved dogs, and enjoyed a measure of solitude. While the public always wondered whether she might patch things up fully with Olivia, or whether she might resurface for a cameo or a big Hollywood retrospective, Joan herself seemed to savor the quiet. On December 16, 2013, at age 96, Joan Fontaine passed away peacefully in her sleep. News of her death reverberated across the film community and among classic Hollywood aficionados. She had been one of the last living ties to that golden age of the studio system. Her departure prompted renewed appreciation for her body of work, from the trembling sincerity of her performance in Rebecca to the nerve-wracking tension of Suspicion, from her devout portrayal in Jane Eyre to the steely composure in Island in the Sun. She was an actress who had won an Oscar under Alfred Hitchcock's directorial baton, starred opposite some of the biggest names in cinema, and then, unlike so many other icons who faded into oblivion, had gone on to enjoy a fascinating globe-trotting life. When we reflect on her passing, we recognize a sort of poetic circularity, that the once fragile baby who needed California's climate to survive eventually became an intrepid soul testing her mettle against the skies in a hot air balloon, crossing the oceans for exotic hunts, all while never quite letting go of the performative magic that had catapulted her to fame. So let this be our final salute to the remarkable Joan Fontaine, a woman who rose from quiet beginnings in Tokyo, overcame illness to pursue a dream, navigated the storms of sibling rivalry, achieved an Academy Award under the direction of cinema's most famed suspense maestro, leapt into balloon racing and fox hunting and gourmet cooking, survived 4 marriages, parented 2 daughters under difficult circumstances, ventured successfully into real estate and other investments, dazzled Broadway audiences, delighted television viewers, and ultimately found a sense of peace in a seaside community. She embodied the art of reinvention and the courage of living life on her own terms. As we wrap up this tribute, consider rewatching one of her films, letting her subtle expressions and measured voice carry you back to that shimmering black and white world. In doing so, you might catch a glimpse of the intelligence and strong will that defined her from childhood all the way to her final days. Joan Fontaine's life was as captivating as the characters she portrayed on screen. With her extraordinary talent, adventurous spirit, and enduring legacy, she remains a symbol of Hollywood's golden age. Though her life ended peacefully, her contributions to the entertainment world will forever be celebrated. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Joan Fontaine's life, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories about Hollywood legends. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.